Welcome to my new filming room for now, which is actually my third son's old bedroom. Now that he's back at college, I have converted it and re-wallpapered it, and I just want to show you how good it looks. Many of you have asked me about this paper, which I have gotten my other videos I make from a place called Wallpapery, and this one is from there as well. But make sure you follow their priming directions if you're going to use peel and stick. Okay. So anyway, I want to talk about this concept around staying a child and how many of us can be walking through our lives at 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 90 and really not be aware that the wounded inner child is running the show. Even though on the outside you are accomplished and independent and you get things done, or maybe you don't do those things, but even still, it doesn't mean that you are childish or immature. What we're talking about are the wounded parts of you, which I believe are always seeking healing. And in fact, I made a TikTok last week where it was just like music and words, and I said something about like when your wounded inner child chooses a partner that you basically hope is going to heal all your trauma. And a few people misread that as me saying like, oh, you're just putting your healing on someone else. Like that's no one's job but yours. Which is interesting because that's not what I was saying. What I was saying was the inner child, which is the unconscious part of ourselves, that is the part that is choosing. And we don't know that. And so that's the part that's seeking healing. So it was misread as me saying you're supposed to heal. But the funny part is, or not funny, but interesting part is, even if you do know what you're doing, there's a role that people can play in helping you heal. That we cannot heal as islands unto ourselves completely. There's only so far you can go, whether that's through a therapist, through friendships, relationships, whatever, parenting. There is there's a reciprocity in that. But I wasn't saying that, but it was interesting to hear that. But the point is that the inner child is choosing. And so the inner child is the one walking around wounded, I believe, choosing partners, accepting or not accepting things, advocating or not advocating, for our lives, whatever we're doing. So I thought we would talk about that a little bit more because it really does play into my understanding of my own brain in terms of being sort of naive or maybe childlike at times. But really it's about the wound and how that part was showing up in my life. So one of the biggest insults my mom could sort of fling at me was, grow up, Kimberly, grow up. And it wasn't the insult in the way that she could be directly very harmful. So this is more like the low-key digging comments. This wouldn't have been the very direct and hurtful things. And it was always like, you don't know what it's like to run a business, grow up, things like that. Which is interesting because I think that when you have a lot of childhood trauma, of course, there are parts of you that don't get to develop, that you miss out on the moving through certain developmental stages because you are in survival mode. And we can get stuck in those stages. But it wasn't even, I'm not even really talking about that. Like, how somebody can be like perpetually 16, it feels like. It wasn't like that. It was just like the wounded child was like sleepwalking through my life and thinking they were no longer wounded. Like I had it figured out and I knew what I was doing, but not really knowing it. And then her insults that way were very hard, but they were hurtful at the time. I'd be like, okay, I wasn't running a business because when I finished my master's degree at almost 30, after changing careers, I got married and immediately began having a family and wanted to be home with them because I'd grown up in daycare alone. And so, it's ironic because I ended up, I think she was jealous. I think it bothered her. Obviously, she didn't have good impulse control around saying and feeling things. And at the time she would live with us 4 or 5 times over the course of my marriage for many months. We would buy her car. All of her furnishings were from me. I'd pay for everything when she was with me during those years. So it's this weird deal where she was actually being cared for when she should have been taking care of herself, and yet accusing me of that. And it being hurtful, but the irony is that I ended up being a single mom, raising 4 kids alone, basically full custody, having to build a career, going back to, getting a doctorate in my 40s, building a business and a practice, and not having anyone else to rely on, So it's interesting now, but I think it was threatening to her. But the point is that even her saying that is an interesting choice of words, like grow up. because it was like, yeah, I'm this wounded child in large part because of you. And I don't know what I'm doing, but I think I know what I'm doing, right? Like, kids are like, I'll do it, me do it. It's like, when they're going through like that toddler stage and kind of another version of when they're separating in adolescence. It's kind of like that, but like I had no idea that's what I was doing. I thought I was like fully in my adult self. So what can it look like when your wounded inner child is making decisions for you and you don't know it? Because this is where I think it could have made a difference if I had known. It might not have, but I do believe that it could have. So I'm going to pull these from the CPTSD website, just on the sort of average, pulling up what does it look like to have a wounded inner child, especially as it relates to complex PTSD and complex trauma. And the first thing is, and I've discussed this a lot, but it's like this deep feeling that something is wrong with you, that you are unlovable and unworthy. And I would have never, if you'd said, do you feel lovable and worthy? I would have said, yeah, because my sense of self was enough to feel that way. But the way it played out in me truly not believing I was worthy was in my lack of boundary setting, my partner choice, the things that I, would not say to friends that hurt my feelings, but then I would just like end relationships or friendships, not self-advocating, not taking care of myself physically, maybe neglecting things that were important, or just generally, it wasn't reflected in how I showed up for myself in my life. And even though it was in other ways, the core, when it got really triggered, was that I don't believe that I believed I was worthy of those things. And so that deep feeling that, or like I was always in trouble, going back to hypervigilance and my eggshell parents, right? Everything was like, no matter what, even though up here I would be like, well, that's messed up. She shouldn't do that. Deep inside, I'd be like, but are you sure? Like, maybe you did something wrong, or maybe you said it wrong, or, I just always felt like I was in trouble. And that was that child self. Why was I in trouble? Because there was something wrong with me. Things were my fault. Not true, but that's the child's version. And so to counteract that, I did a lot of, and the other thing is, another common dynamic is being a people pleaser and a compulsive caretaker. So that the way I learned to have value in the world, and the way I did, was to rotate around my parents, to regulate them, to be their best friends, to help them calm down, to distract them, to solve adult problems for them, to be an old soul, parentified and meshed, all of that. And so that was about externalizing what my value was. It was like, I'm only okay if you're okay. And then kind of taking that to the full level of, oh, this is how I feel good in the world. I'm going to be the most involved mommy, the best caretaker, the best parent, the best wife, have the best home, take care of my home. Like all of these things which were important and mattered, but they superseded my sense of self. It was like a defense mechanism against feeling bad, unworthy, not good enough. I'm going to hyperdrive my value to others and also just neglect my own pain in the process and not even regard it at all. So being compulsively caretaking and a people pleaser can be another thing. The next thing is having a lot of anxiety around everything. New things, places where there are no control, like just really walking around in some ways on eggshells with your own anxiety because you're so worried about bad things happening to you, and maybe you've had a lot of bad luck and trauma, and that just happens. We all get it, but some get more than others. And so new things, everything is like going to be taken away from you. So you have a great sense of fear of losing everything, or of like something happening to you or your loved ones, or ending up penniless, alone, whatever it is, or just meeting new people, trying new things. Like there's a lot of fear. You have a lot of fear about that because you didn't have that safe nest to take risks within, like thinking about attachment. The next one is you feel guilty for setting boundaries and don't feel entitled to them. So, you want to say no, but you're like, oh, but my parent has all this trauma. Like they don't mean to do that. Or I have to call them every day. What will they do without me? It's like, yeah, but it destroys you every day. The idea of setting boundaries and holding them is uncomfortable, is painful, feels impossible, or when and if you do it, you feel tremendous guilt. Like you are not allowed as a full adult self to say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't like that. That's not okay. The next one is you are driven to be a superachiever perfectionist. So this is very common in complex trauma, where you have that inner critic, right, that's trying to like keep everything perfect. And if everything is perfect, then you will be safe. And that guides everything. So it's like you have to, either it's all or nothing. And this can be a setup, right? It can be where you start projects and don't finish because you can't be perfect. It can be that you have to get an A+ in everything, or you're a failure. It can be that you are just driven to the point where you exhaust yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally because the child has this belief inside that perfectionism is the way to be loved. And that can also play out in being controlling and rigid. And I will say that when I first had my kids, it was like, I feel like my generation of parents didn't have any parenting books, whatever. And so I was going to, and I had a master's degree. I was going to read the books and do everything right and have these meals. And I think at times it was kind of annoying. I think it was too rigid. It was not necessarily, and of course I eased up with each child, and then you go from being married to being single. It's like my last child has like a different story of me than my first, which I think is classic. But the point is that I think at times because when you have no control in childhood, the one thing that you want is control, and you have this illusion, like I said, that it's in the last video, it's gonna like help you. So that can be one thing, just being like overachieving, rigid, perfectionistic. The next one is constant self-criticism, which goes along with that. So like there's just this voice hovering over your head. It's often hypervigilance, it's often control, perfectionism, all together, anxiety. But like no matter what, it's like something's up here going, are you sure about that? What are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. Why do you think you can do that? Or that's so dumb, you're so stupid, you're so cringy. Which is a huge thing to overcome making content. I'm still letting myself get cringier all the time, and I'm okay with it, but it's a little scary sometimes. Okay, so that's a big one. The next one is feeling ashamed of your emotions or not letting yourself feel emotion. So everything around emotion, you have to hold to yourself. You don't want to share with others. I used to spend a lot of time alone in my bedroom. It was a huge place for me. And I would sit on my floor on my blue carpet and listen to records. Because, I'm a 60s baby. I was born in 68. All of my like Stevie Nicks and Journey and like all of those albums, crying like every day, a lot of emotions. But I did not show that to my parents. I did not show that to my friends. Like, I was a very deeply emotional, overthinking human, but you wouldn't have seen that. So it was like close to your chest. You don't feel safe. You feel ashamed. Or maybe you were mocked or minimized. Oh, like my mom would also call me a crybaby. Why are you so sensitive? Like that was a huge one. And from my whole childhood, everything was deeply emotional for me. Side note, menopause has changed that a little bit, but not necessarily in a good way, but also in a good way. That's another video. The point is like just being so intense in your feelings. And then alongside that, also feeling a lot of shame in your body. Around intimacy, around the image of your body, which, look, I grew up with, 90s, 80s supermodels, right? I mean, then we have social media. Like, to be a female in this culture is very difficult. And whether you're, don't have this kind of curve or that kind of curve or not enough curves or too many curves, but deep inside, just the whole thing around your body, it's like the wounded child part of you doesn't see yourself as a fully evolved adult body. It's like, in some ways it's kind of yucky. It's like, I just try to describe this to my male clients sometimes, what it feels like to be a little girl, where one day you're going along and you're in your girl body, and then you start to develop, and before you have the language to even understand, depending upon when this happens, you start to notice men looking at you. And they're looking at you, and it changes like that overnight. And it feels yucky. But for most of us, we don't yet understand what's happening. We just are observing that something has changed, and it feels objectified. You feel objectified. You feel predatorized. That's not a word. Even with men, the good men, like, because men are looking. And of course, I think it's getting better about what's appropriate, like talk and boundaries in the offices with, people. But the point is that there's just shame. And that feeling is like the shame you feel your whole adult life can feel like the shame you feel when you're like, ew, what is he looking at? Because you're a child still. You're 11, you're 12, right? You're playing with Barbies, but some guy is leering at you in the grocery store in a way that even though you don't yet know what that means, is different and not comfortable. So that feeling can follow us our whole lives. And we might have to perform around intimacy or act out who we think we're supposed to be or try to, but to feel like a sense of like confidence and autonomy and not shame-ridden in your body is often a sign, even if you don't know it. Maybe you have all these rules about intimacy or you cover up whatever, but deep inside there's shame. The next couple of things are having a deep distrust of everyone and everything. So the point is, when you have emotionally unsafe parents and you're not allowed to develop as a child, to work through things, to take risks, to safely be in the nest and out of the nest, what you've learned is that grown-ups are not safe. And so if they don't take care of you, if they're neglectful, if they're what I talk about a lot around eggshell and you develop hypervigilance, it's like you can't trust that you can literally be safe mentally, physically, or emotionally with anyone. Because if there was no one that provided that for you, or it was conditional, or even if only one parent does, but the other parent doesn't, you're not truly fully safe. You never had the experience of being like, I could throw a fit, I can cry, I can be angry, I can run away, like a little toddler run away. I can fail, and I can still be safe. No, if you had parents who yelled a lot, screamed a lot, left you alone a lot, abandoned you, neglected you, everything feels conditional. And so it's like you're trying to tap dance and perform to provide for those parents. And so that gets translated over into all relationships. Unless we work at it and we're aware of it and we're developing security, deep inside, no one is safe and we don't trust anyone. And that's what I talked about. I'm going to discuss in the next video. I'm going to go more into attachment around this topic, is that I didn't understand that no matter how much I had anxiety about losing everyone I love, because those things had happened also, I'd also had this wall. And that wall is the child's wall, saying like, you know what, I'll let you in, but only so far. And most of us that are doing this, at least I believe when it happens, until we understand, like through therapy or books, we don't know we're doing it. I would say I love this person with all my heart. I would say they were my soulmate. I would say I let them in. It's only I can look back and be like, no, you didn't. And you also chose somebody who was never going to be able to even be safe. So that's a double whammy, and that's what most of us do, unless we know what we're doing, I believe. And then the last two things are I avoided conflict at all costs. So I was like a child in conflict with an adult's brain. So what I mean was I didn't feel entitled to my anger or being upset. And I had this degree in psychology, right? So it was like, oh, I had really yelly, chaotic parents. I'm not going to do that. But the child part of me would tolerate what I had learned to tolerate, which is promises of change, bad behavior, loneliness, whatever it was, even though the adult part thought they were self-advocating by saying, hey, I'm struggling with this issue and we're going to have like an adult conversation. It never changed anything. And the child, the wounded child, let that be okay, because the wounded child had learned that is how we get love. We take a bunch of, and that's what we do. That's what we do. We justify, we minimize it, but we take it. So I didn't feel entitled to my anger, and a child would be scared of anger, and I was scared of anger like a child, because in my brain, I didn't know how to get there. And as a quick aside, I'm almost out of time, so I have a client, but I was making a video about selective mutism with autism and with high masking. And one of the places I've really struggled with my kids is that I've historically not been a yelling parent. I've had, and I try not to discuss my kids here, but because of some other issues, there were periods where they may have been yelling, there was conflict, but like generally speaking, I'm not a yelling kind of parent. And so when my kids, when they really make me mad, especially when they became teenagers, this did not happen when they were little as much. It's happened when they started to separate and push back, which is why I talk a lot too in other videos, and I just probably should make a video about this, about when you've had toxic parents and then your kids appropriately start to push back and sometimes they cross boundaries and yell at you, that can feel very triggering and dangerous. And so what happens is, let's say, and my kids are pretty good at this, but they're human. Let's say one of them has said something like really like angry, loud, rude, disrespectful. My first inclination inside is that I want to say back all the things that were said to me. But I don't. And so what happens is I literally get where I can't speak. And my kids have accused me of giving them the silent treatment in those moments. But I cannot, because I want to say really mean things, like things I would not ever say to them, that I've actually never said, but that I've said them in my head, like I've walked by the room and been like, because they're teenagers and they're annoying, but I don't say that to them and they would never see me do that, is my point. My point is, I'm a human being. I feel pissed at them because they're annoying and I'm annoying. But I shut down, and I've been rethinking that. It's like, I've always thought it was because I've been so triggered, and maybe it is from the trauma of my own parents, that I don't want to re-injure my kids by being verbally wounding. But I literally cannot, when I'm really upset, I cannot speak until I calm down. Because in my mind, I have two switches. Don't speak and say every bad thing. Now, more often than not, I will say things like, well, that hurt my feelings, like I don't like the way you're talking to me, or, I will do that. But when I'm tired and deeply triggered, so this doesn't happen every time we have conflict, it just happens when like the perfect storm happens. So I try to be, or I'll just pause and I'll come back and I'll text them and be like, hey, I need to let you know that like that didn't feel very good. And I'm not okay with like, see, I say like a lot. I know, because I've had 4 teenagers. I'm not okay with this thing, but it hurt my feelings the way you shared that. Or, hey, what you did was not okay, but I didn't respond well. Like, I'm okay with all of that. But when it really gets triggering, I can't speak. And so I'm starting to wonder if that could be connected. Anyway, and then the last thing is, on my phone, my cute daughter just said, did you make the cupcakes? Because I made frosting last night, but not the cupcakes. A fear of abandonment. And I would have told you that I don't have that fear, and not in the way that when I talk a lot about the fear of abandonment being the core of borderline. It's more like deep inside the child believes, if we're walking around, and it may be on the borderline, I should say spectrum, but it may go all the way up from there down to just like deep inside walking around as a wounded child. I just didn't believe that anything would last. I didn't walk around thinking my husband was going to leave me. I mean, I just didn't. I felt, interestingly enough, maybe overly secure about some things and not paying attention to enough others. But it was more like the fear of losing everything. That was the fear of abandonment I felt. Like, I finally got the house, the car, the kids, the spouse, and everything was going to be taken away from me. Because something bad was going to happen to him. Like I had said, he flew a lot, and I was just terrified. And I don't think I thought it, I didn't connect the dots, like, oh, but it was like the child walking around in that kind of trauma trance was like, you have to beg and plead and pray and control and everything. Like everything could change tomorrow. And therefore that drove, like, don't push back, or accept boundaries, or don't accept boundaries, I should say, or don't set boundaries, I should say. It didn't matter. The wounded child, the abandonment was about being abandoned from the life I longed for. And of course it was about self-abandonment. I had to abandon myself to try to make all those plates keep spinning in the air. And the last thing I will say is this, I don't know, I've talked about if I'll ever fully discuss what happened in my marriage, because it's not normal for many reasons. But the irony is that all of the things I feared happening, that I thought that I was doing all of these things to prohibit it, they all happened. They all happened. Medically, mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, everything. It was like the table flipped. At one day in my marriage, and then it took about 2 more years before I ended it. The point is that you think as a child you're doing all these things and you're treading water so fast, and it's going to keep you from losing it all if you let yourself set boundaries, or if you push back, or you advocate, or you stop being controlling, because it's this fantasy you have, and nothing will stop the trajectory of your journey, whatever that is. And whether you believe in a higher power, you don't, the universe, like whatever it is, just existing as a human, there's no way to know what tomorrow brings. Like, I know that, and you all know that. It's like no kidding. But truly, I wish I had understood that, because all of this childlike version was a child's panic at trying to like go through life, still with all those wounds, trying so hard to watch Oprah and read self-help books and heal. But it wasn't until I came to reconcile my mom and that relationship that things really began to change. So I really spent the last 5 to 7 years really working a lot on that topic, alongside my parenting and my triggers and my kids' traumas and wounds and my ex, like all of that. So I just want you to know that you can be walking around and like just like kicking ass in life as an adult, but your wounded inner child can still be calling all of the shots and you may not know it. So if you resonate with any of these things, I would encourage you to do more work, to seek more understanding, to try to, like, without judgment, like open up a space inside of yourself to just unpack and say, I wonder if this thing might be going on, and I wonder how that might be showing up in my life in a way that is actually not serving me. So once again, I thought this was going to be a short video, and it's not, but I hope it was helpful, and I'm going to talk in the next video about attachment, specifically those swings of disorganized with like anxious and avoidant, and how that affected the way I engaged in my life. And I hope that therefore that will translate into helping you understand, if you had a complicated childhood, how that might be showing up in your life. I'm talking fast. Okay, have a good day, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye. Oh, I'm just going to show you this real quick. As I've talked so much about being like the mom I wanted to be, my daughter's at school and she's like, "Hi mama, did you make cupcakes?" She's 16. So cute. And like I said, I made the icing or the frosting, but not the cupcakes. So there's a part of that that feels really good when you get to be the parent that you longed for. I wish I could say I've done it perfectly. I haven't. Nowhere close. But to kind of give that, to go from being raised in daycare and a latchkey child to me still now having my teenagers say, "Did you make food? When did you make?" or "What are you baking?" And that being a way I've shared love has been incredibly healing for me. I wish I could do more cooking, but there's just so many great cooking videos. I just haven't bothered. You know, I made videos a while back around that. But like, there are ways to heal. I want to share that. So just keep going. Don't give up. Okay.